All right, welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 61. I am your host, Barney Smith of storycomic.com, and we are incredibly excited to have with us the award-winning and celebrated writer of comics and fiction prose, Stephanie Nina Pitsirilos.
There you go. Hi.
Hey,
Thanks so much
Stephanie.
for having me.
You're welcome. And I got to say, we were talking before we went on the air that I first discovered you when I interviewed Matthew Goodwin a few months ago when he was promoting his Kickstarter speculative fiction for dreamers, and you had
Twister.
Yes, and you had a story in there called Gene, right? That was your
Correct.
story, and it was. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And you have a lot of projects that have popped that are popped up. You got COVID Chronicles. You have also you're part of a Kickstarter. You wrote a piece for a Kickstarter that's out now called Elsewhere Volume 2, and you have some other projects too that I'm sure we'll be talking
Insider
about.
Art came out. Yeah, tons of stuff.
Yeah. And so I'm so excited to talk to you about your process, how you're working, and all of your style and how you create but before we jump right into that, what I want to do is kind of give our readers, people
listeners, maybe they're both.
They could be reading it closed caption. Who knows?
Yeah, this is true.
So our viewers and our listeners and our readers, gonna give people a kind of a background on how you got into writing comics and writing prose, and then we'll jump right into asking you some more questions.
Okay, sure. So I have to say what every writer says. Oh, I was a kid and I always wrote. I have to say it. It's true. But I was always doing comic strips for my family. I would just look at family events or just horrible stories, and just processing it with humor and in little cartoons. And in junior high, I went to this really, I'm going to call it a really hippie junior high school. It was like an alternative junior high. I think now you would call it a charter school, but back then in New York City, it was just called alternative. So we were learning Latin, and one class was just The Hobbit, and you could do a fanzine as your report. I mean, it was just out there. So they were very open about what we learned and, how we did things. So instead of handing in papers, I would say I would like to hand in a novel. I don't want to do your assignment. I want to write a novel. They patted my head. They allowed me to write this awful novel, although I did squeeze it into one of my other novels years later. So I had that exposure. And then in high school, I would kind of do the same. I went to a more normal high school than the junior high that taught The Hobbit, although that's still very cool. But for English class, instead of turning in book reports, I asked if I could take Grendel and Moby Dick and just write a graphic novel out of it. I was ahead of my time, right? I didn't call it a graphic novel. I'm I just want to summarize the book instead of using words. I want to make whatever word I use for a graphic novel. Anyway, all that, was all fun and dandy. But I grew up. I grew up in a household where my mom came from Puerto Rico when she was 5 years old. Part of Operation Bootstrap, U.S. colonization of Puerto Rico. Grew up in abject poverty. My dad came to the United States, to New York City, from Greece, an after effect of World War II, and then fleeing the Greek Civil War. And also grew up in abject poverty, but in the Bronx. So, we didn't, we were fortunate that, they were able to carve themselves out of that. And this is a very long-winded answer to your question, but it's all part of the story. But, so we were fortunate that we didn't have that in our childhood, but it's very much a part of our life, the memory of that. And, basically, no one said you could be a writer. And, we didn't tell ourselves we could be a writer because we want to eat. We didn't want to worry about bills, And, you know, you have family also that might not make it out in the same way you do. So, and I'm a firstborn, so you got to have that, like, you know, guilt. So, you know, I ventured into public health, and made a conscious decision, though, not to go into medicine as a physician. And part of me did that because I kind of secretly wanted to carve out time to write. And I was afraid, which is silly, you could do both. But I just had this thing that, you know, I want to do something that's kind of easy and would pay and have financial security, but kind of let me just do my writing thing. And, you know, at some point in my public health career, I said, you know, this isn't enough. This isn't enough, you know. I couldn't really name it, but, you know, I have a very supportive husband, and he's like, take some writing classes. Because I tried. I said, I'm going to do a sci-fi fantasy novel, and nothing worked. Yeah. So I took some writing classes. One of the perks of working at the time, I was working for Columbia University. You get free tuition for for a lot of courses. I don't know if they do that now, but back then they did. And you know, I had some wonderful teachers. I took a few just basic courses. And I started to notice every time I took a course, a professor would pull me aside and said, I want to mentor you. I want, you know, so I knew I wasn't writing chicken scratch, you know, I was doing something. And yeah, so, you know, I just, and I didn't, you know, usually when you take these courses, I didn't get an MFA, but usually the rule is you do little short stories and you do an anthology, you get an agent, whatever. But I was like, no, I'm writing a novel. So I just dove straight in. And it was really hearing Alyssa Albert was my first teacher. And she said that variation on, she said, take what you know and write what you love. Mm. And like, I mean, that fixed everything. Like, I'm like, right. I was able to write after hearing her say that. Yeah, and you know, wrote my first novel just on my own, learned how the whole publishing industry works, pitched that, probably was rejected 150 times by literary agents. And I said, you know, I'm going to work on a different novel. That one was, my two novels that I have right now are very much Greek history side. And then the one I currently have on sub with my agent is some Nuyorican history on the Upper West Side. But I kept writing, and I wrote a second book, and I got different offers from different agents. And yeah, so that's the prose side. I guess you want to hear the comic side, because that's totally... I can just keep talking. Yeah,
because that's how it started, right? Yeah, because you started writing prose. That's where that, and then you dipped your toe first into some comics, and then you jumped in and started swimming, right? Is that?
Yeah. So I, like, you know, growing up, you know, my cousin Aaron Guzman, who's an illustrator I work with, and we have a lot of things planned. We have some comic together in COVID Chronicles, as well as with Seth Martel. But like, I looked up to my cousin Aaron. Aaron, if you're there, hello. He's just an amazing illustrator, and he would babysit us, and he would just draw. And I can't find it. I looked all over the house, but he would just draw the most amazing things. He actually did.
Was it a Wolverine and a Psylocke picture, right?
Oh yeah, you're good.
Yeah, see, I did my research.
Yes. I don't know where I put it. That one is this other one. So I really looked up to him. I mean, and Aaron, you know, my memory is I remember taking him. I was like a little preteen. This is my older cousin. And I'm like, we're going to Comic-Con. Now, mind you, Comic-Con then was like, I don't know, this 80s, 90s. I lost track of time. It was like Big Apple Comics, right? It was like in some Pennsylvania hotel, something, right? Mm-hmm. And I would like go up with him to the table, be like, this is my cousin. You need to hire Marvel. He's like the most amazing illustrator. You know, like I admired him. But and he eventually actually did a Punisher story for Marvel, until then going into graphic illustration. Anyway, long story short, it never occurred to me to write though comics. Like this, I was of the generation of like Jim Lee, you know, like right. It was all about the art, you know, no one told me someone wrote comics. Sorry. You know, I know the names are there, but like, and it wasn't until later when I, you know, looked back, I'm like, Chris Claremont, oh my God, that's why I part of why I like these stories, besides the great matching of illustrators. I totally lost track of what question I was answering. Comics. So, so, but I never told myself that. And Aaron, you know, was seeing how I was like struggling with prose and the waiting and the editing, and you know, this agent wants, you know, when you're on querying, change this, wait a year, or no, I don't want to. You know, it's a very slow, particularly literary fiction, which is the genre I write. But here's this, you know, I write what Professor Daniel Bautista termed comic book realism. And that's a type of literary fiction that mixes realism with popular culture that defines the lives of the protagonists, particularly Latinx protagonists.
Right.
So, you know, my novel, you know, that's on sub right now, My Agent, is based on very much X-Men 137 Jean, which we could talk about. You know, my novel I'm working on is based on the Infinity Gauntlet before the movies came out. Okay. Right. So, you know, I never really understood how much comics influenced, even though it was obvious. And getting nudges from my cousin, like, forget them, create our own, let's do our thing. You know, we're going to do our graphic novel together. And even one of the editors from Speculative Fiction for Dreamers, Alex Hernandez, I know people by Twitter handles, it's so hard to remember their real names. You know, he sent me a submission. He's like, you know, you should, he was an editor that really liked Jean. And, you know, you remember when editors like your work. I mean, the reason I'm in Speculative Fiction for Dreamers is Matt really gave me such warm feedback when I applied for the first anthology and it wasn't right. And then he reached out to me when this anthology, the second one. So, you know, those little moments with editors make a big difference. And he nudged me, Alex, to apply to submit this one comic. And it just like clicked. I'm like, yeah, why don't, you know, okay, my cousin's been saying it, but he's my cousin, you know? And it was all the nudging, and then just editors like Nicole Boos from Comics Experience, who, when she got the call from Shelley Bond that she was going to do insider art, you know, said, hey, do you want to be in this? And I was like, me? You know, but all of that, it's people really pushing me into comics. The more I try to do prose, the more comics. And I kind of, and then Seth Martel that we were talking about prior, I don't know how much of that got in. Seth, hi. One day I'll actually meet you. We have all these comics out. But like, you know, Seth Martel at the time was part of Comics Experience and said, you know, hey, you seem like a nice person. Do you want to do, you know, do you want to submit together? Do you want to, and I had been admiring his work. I really liked how he had in his own work women of color, and he did them well, and nice. And yeah, he kept sending me, hey, let's submit here. I'm like, okay, let's do that. And you know, so it's wonderful people like that. And now fortunate also Shelley Bond has entered my life and has been very supportive and encouraging, and yeah.
So let me ask you this question, because compared to the prose writing and then writing comics, what do you see is what format comes easier for you, I guess?
I have to say, I mean, getting a story down is easy for me. I mean, I'm not, you know, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx it, but I'm not a writer that has writer's block if I know I want to do a story, right? So an idea coming down is not hard. Prose takes more time for me because you have to perfect it. It has to be polished, right? It has to, you know, if you're looking for an agent, you can't send, and it's fiction, you can't send a proposal. You have to have this really highly polished product that requires years and years of research. Your comic might require years and years of research, depends on what you're doing. But a comic for me, you know, I would say it comes easier. And I don't know if it's just a matter of a time thing where I know I have room to be working so closely with different people right? You know, prose writing could be very lonely until an editor, an agent, depending, you know, but it's not as crowded as comics. So I feel like there's this room where I don't spend the mental energy to try to make it perfect, because it's not, you know, I learned this in the women in comics panel taught by Danny Lore and Vita Ayala, and it stood out, really stuck in my head, that, you know, the illustrator is not there to implement your vision, right? It's a collaboration. And that kind of frees up that part of my mind that I have to have every single thing figured out. I mean, you can,
Right.
but there's just a little bit of room where you don't have to get so attached. You don't have to have, it's a collaboration. So for me, it just seems to come easier, and I could do it quicker. Like,
Right.
you know, I think Seth, right? Everything we've done is like, okay, we've got to do it in a week, you know, you know, not everything, but I think pretty much. So yeah.
And so you mentioned that you're working with Seth Martel. When you sit down and say, here's the script, how much back and forth do you get, where is there any times you're like, no, I really want it to be like this, or how much of that give and take happens between you and the artist?
Okay, so it depends on the artist.
Okay,
so
yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
so Seth is totally, and that's okay. Everyone's different, right? So Seth is very much collaborative, very much, is this what you want? And I'm like, no. Is this what you want? Kind of. Can you do this? You know, to one point where I'm like, I'm sorry for all those texts and emails, Seth, but like taking pictures of comics and writing on the pen, drawing stick figures, like it should look like this, and that works, right? But if I sent that to my cousin Aaron, he'd laugh at me, right? Because we're family, right? And it's a different style. So, you know, it really depends on the illustrator, and the style, and then and what the comic's about. So like for Seth and I's comic in Elsewhere too, that's an example of Seth had a story idea and he wanted XYZ elements, and I wrote a story around it. So in that one, when he would ask me, hey, does this work? I'm like, yeah, it's whatever you want, because it's a different, I told him, this is not like my baby. Like I didn't like come up from this with scratch. I want this to work with your vision, and it should always work with each other's vision. But because of the creation process and how it started, there's a different attachment. With Aaron Guzman, when we did DR 163, that was also very much a sort of melding of the minds, and a co-creator, you know, versus just illustrated, just to be technical. So, you know, there's very much of like, okay, you thought that works, or, you know what, there's too much talking, you know, your prose is getting, you know, your prose hat's getting in the way. So it really depends on the project, and I think the illustrator.
Okay. All right. And how many, cause we'll talk in a few minutes about COVID Chronicles and Elsewhere. What do you find when you're sitting down and writing a topic, when you mentioned there, you know, take what your previous teacher said, and you take what you know and write what you love. Has there been any crossroads on that, where the things that you know isn't always necessarily the things that you're really passionate about, where you said, this is like, is there something where you write, it's like, this is important to say, this is an important story to tell, compared to some of the things that are just fun to write? What do you find easier?
Yeah. You know, again, the story just comes to me. I mean, that's like, it's like this, I can't explain this. It's like a magic thing, you know? So like once, I think the biggest challenge I had, and I'll use this example, you know, Shelley Bond and I were sitting, and she was like, you know, I really think you should do this a Greek retelling. And I've never had somebody tell me, I want you to do this. Right. I mean, the story with Seth and Elsewhere, A Real Selfie, yes and no, it was a little different. It was more of a middle ground. But for someone to say, I want you to start from here, that was really hard, because I already have in my head what stories I want to write. I already have, and I know that. It's just a matter of time for me, you know, to sit down and do that. So sitting there and then hearing, I sort of just this outside request, that I spent a little bit more time trying to figure out a story. But always what happens, and, you know, I kind of stay in my lane. And that example, I went back to my years living in Greece, and remembering a particular statue that stuck out for me that I then realized became a theme in my third novel that I'm currently writing, and makes an appearance in my first novel that's kind of sitting in my hard drive. So I think that for me is the hardest, when it's not something that I already have in my very long sheet of to do. But the comic that Seth and I have coming out, and actually it's coming out this weekend in Mermaids Monthly, and it's going to be free in March for anyone that wants to read it, Andromeda. That was some freaky, weird, I read the call for submissions and like the story downloaded in my brain. like I'm like, I have to write this. And I told Seth, I'm not going to do, I can't do any more shorts. I have these graphic novel projects, and I'm like, Aaron, I promise I won't take, we're going to get, because Aaron and I said we were going to, like, we had this epic comic, graphic novel. Like I spent like a year researching. I mean, it's like crazy. I have like mountains of books, and it's like, it's crazy. I have volume 1, 6, and then volume 2. And then, and then all these projects came. I'm like, no, I'm going to submit to this. And actually, and Aaron says that's smarter, start doing your thing, getting your name out there. I'm going to be doing my thing. He has these great mini comic bundles people should check out with writer Jason Alexander. And it's good older cousin advice. And I don't even know if I answered your question, Barney.
Well, in a way you did. Yeah, you of course. Yeah. So talk to us a bit about your style, because listeners and viewers might say, hey, this is great, Stephanie. You got all these ideas. Where do you get the time to do this? People will be saying, I got kids at home, I got a full-time job. How do you carve out time and still, have that? So what's your process like for that?
Yeah. For my novels, for my prose, my first one, when I did it, I didn't have kids. I was doing it all the time. I was doing it late at night. I don't function anymore past 5 p.m. It's amazing I'm not asleep here. But I wrote my second novel after having my first child. I tell people this, you go with whatever's going on in your life. And for me, it's an obsessive process. Like, I don't want to do anything else but write once I know what I want to write. So I don't watch TV. I don't sit and watch TV, right? I'll watch the news, and I'll limit myself to certain programs so I don't get like addicted. Like, I'm going to watch The Expanse. I'm going to watch Altered Carbon. I'm going to watch Transformers Earthrise. That's so sad and depressing though. But like, I'll have my little shows. But I'm careful not to like have too many, because that'll eat up your time. I'm very active on social media, but I don't do Facebook. Like, so like I carve, I make sure to carve out my space, and I just write what I can. So prior to COVID, I did a lot of traveling on the subway. That's like 2.5 hours sometimes a day. So I'm always writing on the subway. Yeah, my kids are there. Here are your crayons. Here's your paper. If you see anyone crazy, scream, like, so I can pay attention. I train my older one, make sure you look at the stops so we know to get off. It's just those little things. And just knowing when I work best, and it's the morning. And oh my God, this is like making me think of my high school speech salutatorian, and I didn't thank my mother. I still have guilt over this for my success and why I was able to do what I did. So Mom, thank you, prior to COVID, to watching the kids for me all the time. She doesn't know how to use the internet, so she's not on this, but somebody tell her that I thanked her. But quite fortunate that prior to COVID, because not anymore, I realized that co-parenting with my parents was a great way to support my writing career, if you will. And, co-living with my parents for half the school week and having that support really helped me. But, you do what you can. You just carve out those spaces, and you honor when life like with my second child, yeah, that was a hard postpartum. Like I was just like tired, and my mind didn't work. By my third daughter, she's like a sleep demon. She didn't sleep. You know, I didn't have to sleep train my first one. I thought that was normal. I didn't understand why parents complained all the time. Then the second one came, and she was a little. Then the third one came. She was horror. So I know it's like for 18 months I did not sleep, and I think my body gave up and said, "We're going to exchange some life years from you, and your mind's going to be sharp, even though you're like dead inside from not sleeping." And I was able to write. For some reason, I was able to write. So you do what you can.
Right. Yeah. Wow. and so basically it's you find the time you can, and for you, as you say, your ideas, just you have plenty of ideas. So is there any warm up times, or are you just you go right to town as soon as you have an idea?
Listen, with this warm up, all right. I see these illustrators, see my cousin on Instagram with warm up. What is warm up? Like, what is that? Doesn't your hand get tired? Like, why would that be warm up? Why wouldn't you say? But I'm not an illustrator, so I've never heard. Or, Nina, do you warm up like when you write? I've never heard of that. No, I just write. But it depends on, and actually this is an important point too. It depends on what phase I'm in the writing process. So if it's a first draft, and when my kids started coming, I went from typing directly, first drafts, to I didn't want them to see me on the screen so much. So I do everything with pen and paper. So if you ask them, they've written books too, because they sit there with a notebook and they just write in their little alien language. And so, you know, that's how I adopted writing, you know, when in having kids. So it depends on what if it's polishing, you know, that's something for the morning, like if it's like straight up editing. So no, I don't have a warm up activity. I don't understand.
and like, yeah, now you kind of answered my other question too, is that you keep a notebook next to you. So if there's an idea that pops in your head, how do you scribble it down?
Yeah. So there's always notebooks around me by the bedside. If I'm on the subway, I have to have a notebook. I joked, made the baby cry because I forgot my notebook. So I took her notebook and her pencil or crayon. I'm like, I'm going to draw you a picture, I promise. Just wait a little bit. Yeah, so I have everything pretty much everywhere. At one time, because I was commuting back and forth from my parents' house to our other apartment, I started using Google Docs. Oh no, I think I lost a few things, and that's some bad stuff. Like you can't lose your stuff. So I stopped using Google Docs.
Okay, all right. So talk to us about, because you just had just released. You mentioned that you just this past Monday, as of this recording, you just had a book launched, a comics anthology book called COVID Chronicles. There it is. Do you want to just talk to people how that book came?
Yeah. So okay, Seth again and Aaron. So COVID Chronicles, which is published by a new imprint, Graphic Mundi. Oh, great! I don't need to do show and tell. From Penn State University. This is actually their debut publication, and Seth Martel had asked me, and actually this was our first comic, to join a benefit anthology for Get Us PPE, and the anthology was called Heroes Need Masks. And Seth's like, hey, what do you want to do? And I was like, you know what, I really want to do, it'd be nice to do a comic that really went through some of the life of my husband as a physician who bridges the arts with medicine. And specifically his statement that I'm not a hero. This is when COVID came out, like, you know, it's the little things in that we can do in community. And you know, so my first comic with in this book with Seth Martel is Small Acts. And it raised close to $2,000 for Get Us PPE. And then Seth said, hey, COVID, there's a call for submissions for COVID Chronicles. Do you think we can, I think I'm remembering this right, Seth, submit there? And, you know, the editor, Kendra, was just so wonderful. We said, look, this is a digital, the Heroes Need Masks. Would this be eligible? And she said, yeah, so long as it's not in print. And we submitted it, and 2 days later it was accepted. And I was like, wow, comics are cool. You don't get rejected, right? And she was a great editor to work with on this. She had some great feedback, and also listened to my feedback, just that ideal editor relationship. And then I'm like, okay, I want to do another story, but I want to do it with Aaron. And I want to do a story that focuses on some of the challenges I've had with New York City apartment living during our COVID times.
This was Seasons of the City?
Yeah. So that one's Seasons of the City. And I was like, she's not going to accept 2 comics, but I submitted it, and she did. And the thing I like about that is that it also gives you like a little bit, it's this one over, not that one, it's this one over here. Yeah. It gives you a little bit of, it's not just, oh, this is my life in COVID. It's very much, it really shows off a lot of Aaron's style that I think complements my writing. But it shows an experience of not just like living in New York City with COVID, but also gives you a context of gentrification and how New York City's gentrification, with a little history of New Rico and my own family experience in coming here and really making gold out of lead, how those factors come into play during this pandemic. You know, who escapes, you know, all of a sudden it's a ghost town, you know, there's no one in New York. Really? I'm here. There are people here, you know, stop erasing us. We're here. You know, and, you know, just hearing you want to know really where this came from. I'm sitting here. People will hear this in my panel tomorrow for the book launch, but like, I always have beef with like anchormen. Sorry, I do. First it was Peter Jennings. That's in my note. Rest in peace. He was a great anchorman. But I always have a story about news broadcasters. So I forgot what channel I'm watching, but it didn't matter the channel because you saw it on every channel. So there goes my thing of not watching TV. Okay, I watch a little TV, and what was I saying? Oh, so I'm watching TV, and the weather person. You look in the background, they're like, the weather, this is like April, the COVID rates were really high in New York City. And they're like, the weather's great, and like go out and you see, and there's a backyard, there's a slide for the kids, and this is local New York City, local news. And I'm like, this reminds me, and it's a panel in the book, but it really reminds me of my bridge and tunnel teachers in high school. With no disrespect, people live where they live. This is, you know, but that disconnect of, do you know what life is like without that backyard with kids? You know, like, yeah, so what? The weather's nice. Where's there to go? Like, you know, and I say that with all acknowledgement of privilege and some of the other things that I'm fortunate to have. But it was really sparked by like, wow, this is another case of, and Jacqueline Woodson says this in her novel, Another Brooklyn, we need more stories of, I don't want to use the word native New Yorkers, but other New Yorkers, you know, not these, I came to New York City to party, have sex, do drugs, whatever it is that makes you want to come to New York City. Right. Stories of like the other side of why in my parents' building do market rate tenants, they're allowed, this is a building that has rent stabilization legacy. So you're either paying whatever, $700, let's say, for a 1-bedroom, or $6,000 to $7,000. You know, like, so that's just the same apartment, but like so if you're a market rate, you can own a washing machine. So during COVID, wow, like you could wash your clothes in your house. That's like crazy, right? But if you were like the older community, which are mostly the rent stabilized, like my parents, you know, you had to go to the laundry room, and then the laundry room broke and it was closed. So like, you know, they were drying their clothes on radiators, and there's worse things, but it's like those little things that I felt like if there's this anthology out here, I really want to put that forgotten New York, the New York that publishing doesn't really always acknowledge. And Kendra was very welcoming to it.
Right. And you do See, so compared to some of your anthologies that you're part of, and then you're working on standalone graphic novels, you because so which one do you kind of prefer to? Do you kind of gravitate towards what format?
I'm definitely a novelist, whether it's prose or whether it's long form.
Right.
But these shorts, I keep getting invited. I mean, and let me point out this irony again. All praise to Shelley Bond, who also has a Kickstarter going on right now. Really cool radio college DJs. Check out her Kickstarter. Totally forgot now what I was going to say about Shelley Bond. Shelley Bond. So even with Insider Art, which was also, mind you, this is, okay, COVID Chronicles is a benefit anthology. A part of proceeds goes to the Book Charitable Foundation.
Yeah.
And then with Insider Art that came out last year, first it was, it's still on Gumroad, $10. And all proceeds, it goes to female and non-binary comic book retailers.
Right.
Ironically, it's graphic prose. So
really? Okay.
Yeah, no, my story's graphic prose. So that was the funny thing, because when editor Nicole Booth, who edited the bathroom section, I'm totally skipping around. Oh, well. When she edited the bathroom section and invited me, I was like, bathroom? Oh, Lord. I thought, meanwhile, it's a really cool section. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do a comic. This is it. And blah, blah. And they're like, actually, could you change it to prose? So it's actually prose. So a comic
The Lonely Island, right? The Little Island. The Little Island. Yeah, okay,
Little Island.
Yeah.
So I just relish in the irony that my first publication of prose is in a comic book anthology, because comics are cool like that. Now, Barney, what did you ask me? That I mentioned that. Oh, what do I like doing more? So I love, if you read my 5 to 6 page comics, you will maybe see that I definitely have more than a world of 5 pages, and that my mind just works in like epic world building. And, Seasons of the City, I tried to cram the history of New York City from 1977 to present. And my cousin was like, no. And I'm so stubborn that I actually myself drew it in cartoons and said, yes, it can be done. Look at this. It's like, yeah, if you used a microscope and like, but he let me do it just to prove my point. And I still have now my cool own version of Seasons of the City. But I definitely like doing longer works. And I said this year, I definitely wanted to devote more time. But, if I see a submission, like when I saw it for Mermaids Monthly, that like, you hear angels or whatever weird things happen, that like this story has to come out, I'm probably going to do it. Right. Which probably means now Seth's going to send me something.
So let me, because you did kind of, you alluded to one of my favorite words, world building. So let me ask you, so as a writer, how much control over, how much have you asked your artist friends that illustrate your work? Do you ever try to put in like some Easter eggs on some of your past projects at all, or say, hey, like maybe like as an example, like say through COVID Chronicles, or as an example of like, this was a main character in Little Island. Is there a way to
That's interesting.
put in the background? Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think there's 2 questions there. So I definitely, I think, provide a lot of world building for the illustrators. And I think I put like, use your vision too, just to be too humble. Right. So I kind of think I do that, unless it's a comic where, again, they were part of the early co-creator process. I think in terms of my shorts coming out, I think you definitely will see some of the things I'm working on for my longer term ones, not because I'm trying to sneak a character, but because that's the mental capacity of my mind, and all these facts are sitting in there. So like if you look at, Elsewhere didn't publish. I was like, I'll show you Elsewhere. If you look at Elsewhere, A Real Selfie, you will see on one superficial level, you will see a story. I kind of pitch it as, I think if you go to my stories page, you'll see, but that's all right. You don't really need to see it. Okay. You will see like, I think I say, if Scooby-Doo and the Portopian gang vacationed on Vieques, right? Like,
Okay.
you'll see like this crazy story of, you know, 4 kids on vacation, and it's like, ooh, haunted house, and you know, challenging each other, like, you know, really funny, spooky vacation story.
Right.
But but you know, all my stories pretty much have an under layer to it. Oh my gosh, DR163, I forgot about DR163.
Yeah, we'll talk
It's our
about that.
webtoon. But underneath that, there it is. Underneath that, that story is a little bit of the history of the U.S. using the island of Vieques in Puerto Rico as a military target practice, and some of the environmental consequences because of that. And also, you'll see a big influence on my really big graphic novel that eventually I will get to, Aaron. And you know what? To be fair, let me just say this: I have outlined the entire thing, 6 whatever it is, chapters. I don't know what this is at this point. Probably chapters or issues. I don't know. 6 issues, and I have the full script of the first one. So let me just be fair that I do have that. So that a highly influential book was Naomi Klein's Disaster Capitalism in Puerto Rico. I'm getting the title wrong. And it looked at what was going on in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and this so-called new society called the Puertopians. And these are the libertarians that have been going to Puerto Rico with the Bitcoins. Right. And so my comic in Elsewhere has characters. It has a mainlander, meaning a Puerto Rican, that diaspora that's vacationing. You have a local Puerto Rican. You have the vacationer that's not Puerto Rican in vacation. And then you have a Puertopian who is part of this, like, I don't need to speak Spanish. You know, it's no taxes here. And, you know, so you'll find things like that. Little Island in Insider Art also, that one takes place in, well, spoilers, so close your ears if you didn't read it. But that one also, makes note of Culebra and the U.S. military presence. You know, so I always have these things that are in a lot of my other works.
Right. And so how much do you kind of dance between the fact, like you mentioned, you write, you know, like comic realism. How much of this is like, this is real life stuff, or how much of this is like, this is kind of like the world we live in, but there's some twist to it?
So it depends if you're asking me, and I want to say this before I forget. Little Island was illustrated by Ashley Riblet, and who did amazing work. And that actually was a different type of illustrator. See, I'm answering different questions. You're going to have to ask me the other question again. But I want to make sure. But that was a different type of illustrator relationship, because I actually had to work with 2 editors, and I never communicated with her directly until the very end. So that was like weird for me. Again, I was just used to working with my cousin Aaron. And mind you, Aaron was doing my prose. Aaron was for years taking my prose and making them into comics, until then we realized that, oh, wait, I should do scripts. But to go to your question, to answer your question, you know, my novels, or if we're talking about prose, I very much have these certain amount of books already in my head, and I take family stories and weave fiction out of them.
Okay.
So, you know, I took for like my first novel, it was taking, it's sad, but I do take a seed of pain and make it for my family and make a novel out of it. Anyway, you could either ask me about that later or not. For comics, again, it depends on the project. For Insider Art, when I was like, what kind of story am I going to write that takes place in a bathroom? Like, what kind of challenge is this? And my husband's like, gotta write about your grandmother's bathroom. That is my grandmother's bathroom. Insider Art at Little Island is very much my grandmother's bathroom. So, you know, it depends on the story. Real Selfie, I've been to Culebra, but that's me taking my experience in Culebra and seeing the U.S. military tanks on the beach, and then downloading my knowledge from like Naomi Klein's book and making fiction. Now, Andromeda, I was really proud of, because I never ever wrote or could write just straight up sort of sci-fi. You know, I'm very much burdened with family stories. And I don't want to say burdened. I want to write those stories, but it's a very heavy call.
Right.
And if it's not that, I very much put social justice history in my work. And Andromeda was the first time I was able to just do straight up sci-fi, but it still has a statement because I am reclaiming Andromeda and Greek myths, Black roots, because she was whitewashed during, I think it was the Renaissance, and how she was depicted. And if you go back and read the text, they make, there's several notes of her being black skinned. So I still get that in there, but I was very proud that I was able to do this kind of like sci-fi-ish thing.
Yeah. So are they all kind of like all your stories are like a shared universe? It's like, are they all, no?
No. Well, if you wanted to, I guess if you wanted for my 2 novels, I say that the protagonist of my Saints of Columbus, the New Eureka novel, it takes place on the Upper West Side and looks at the legacy of Christopher Columbus on gentrification, spoiler. But that one, I say that her grandfather is the main character in the first novel. I don't say that, but if you interview me, I'll say that, right? And that was me kind of, I think, figuring it out. This was the first things that I was doing. But no, for my shorts, there's no, they're not related. No.
No links between them. Okay. All right.
No, there might be themes, but not in terms of like characters.
So we're getting close to the end of the hour already, Stephanie. So did you want to?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was quick. Did you want to talk briefly about the Kickstarter that you're part of?
Sure. So Unlikely Heroes Studios has a Kickstarter for an anthology with some really cool comics. It's about like 250 pages. It was like half funded already in the first 24 hours. But yeah, check it out. There's some great stories. My story is a real selfie. There's some scary stuff in there, really cool, wonderful art. And you can check out the Kickstarter. It's for Elsewhere Volume 2. Okay. Always free. I didn't get to talk about DR163, a really cool webtoon comic, free, about a graffiti artist and a doctor who have a very unlikely friendship and become these midnight vigilantes.
Yes.
Yeah. There's just so much.
And so this is like your standalone. This is a long-term project you do, the DR165 that's on Webtoons.
Yeah, DR163. Yeah.
63,
it's a standalone. Yeah, DR163. It's with illustrator Aaron Guzman. And
your cousin.
My cousin who does mini comic bundles. These really cool mini comics that you could get a subscription for. But what Aaron and I are going to do, the first season's free on Webtoons. This is the little mini comics, the size. He does it with Jason Alexander. They're really cool. You get them in the mail. Aaron and I will probably be kickstarting later in the year, season 2 for DR163, and we're going to do print. So I had a blast, and I'm actually really proud of this with him because it was our first longer project versus I forget about DR163. I love DR163. So I really, really got a kick out of Webtoons, the vertical scrolling. I mean, it was just so much fun. And but we really want to reach out to a different audience. So that will remain for season 1 free on Webtoons, and look for us for Kickstarter later in the year for season 2.
Okay. Yeah. And then presume, I don't want to presume, but DR must stand for, is it doctor? Is that what?
Yeah, doctor, and very much inspired by my husband's really into graffiti artists, and it's like, it's comical because he's really into them. And I think at one point, one of them is like, you should go bombing with us, which just means, pacing up. And it's like, okay, Clark Kent's going to go bombing. Oh, I love my Clark Kent, but like, he's not the type that would make it really far on the tracks. Like, so I'm like, what if, Aaron and I were talking, what if he did it? What if he became this like, graffiti artist doctor. But it's really cool. In this series, it deals a lot with looking at, he's actually a military veteran physician, and it looks a little bit at PTSD from serving as a military trauma surgeon, and some of the social injustice about pharmaceutical companies and withholding medication to one of his patients. So I always have that in my stuff. It's pretty deep and it's fun. It's fun.
I looked through this. It's a really, I love the point of view too. I think it's really well done. It's fun.
I'm glad.
So this was great. So I had so many more questions, so we'll have to have you come back on again and maybe talk about your next you have another upcoming project coming up soon too. So
yeah. So have me on again. I'd be delighted. We could talk forever. You got to remind me of questions because my mind goes.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, and congratulations on COVID Chronicles that was just launched. And it looks like the Kickstarter that you're part of is well over halfway funded, and that's exciting as well. And I'm making sure people come to, let me get on here. So if people are interested in learning more about your writing and learn more about it, where can they find you?
Okay. Yes. Good. I have this ready. So you could go to my website, stephanieninaPitsirilos.com. I'm really active on social media. So Twitter is Zoe Health, ZOE, and then health. And then Instagram, the Nina Galaxy. Those are the easiest ways to find me.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. I gotta say, I love that painting behind you. What is that?
See, it's so disoriented seeing like, what are you looking at? So actually it's Tito Puente, and it's a friend of ours, Manny Vega. He calls himself a hip hop Byzantine artist. He does mosaics. You can find his work all throughout El Barrio in New York City. He does these really cool tile work. He does prints. Actually his brother is a big graffiti artist as well. But yeah, it's Tito Puente. My husband's a big art collector. I just happen to also be friends with Manny.
Oh wow, that is.
You could do a whole show on the art. I joke that if we don't have savings, it's because my husband invests in art. He loves artists.
But that, in a way, it's savings, right? That's going to be an investment.
That's what he says. Yes, that's what he says. The wife says differently.